Okay, if you happen to have listened to the previous podcast by the Boring Rainer and the illustrious Clifton, you may have gotten a bit depressed because we were talking about autopsies. Mark, you may remember this, but I put it in my little book, Autopsy. My sister died before I was born, and my dad was just heartbroken. And back in those days, I think she died in 53 or 54. Back in those days, it wasn't always apparent, why a child died. So dad requested and paid for an autopsy, but he also said he wanted to be in the room during the autopsy. I can't imagine that. Now, he was a World War II vet, and he had seen lots of death and had nearly been killed himself. But to be in there for the autopsy of his own daughter that he loved so dearly, and he was a quiet man. He was kind of like I was. He was happy not to talk. And I said, why? Why, Dad? Why did you do that? He said, I just had to know and see it for myself why my daughter died. And if you're curious, she had a tumor on the heart. That they found the tumor, and that's what stopped the heart from beating. That is a tragic story, but at the same time, it is a reminder that something as dark as an autopsy, something as difficult to talk about as death, can actually help the living. Because let me tell you the rest of the story.
Okay.
The rest of the story is this. Because of this, that information was passed down to his children and to their children. And so my niece, because of this, went to the doctor and found out she had a heart problem, and she's had heart surgery since then. She's a 40-year-old lady now, but it allowed her. It gave her an awareness that she needed to check on her own heart, and as the rest of our family. So the autopsy of the dead became hope for the living. And that's what I want to get through about autopsy. It's not all this dark stuff. It's stuff that can really, really help us. And as we talked about autopsies in our previous episode, you can go back to 278 and listen to that if you have not already, or watch it on YouTube if you want to see Mark, and not me. I'm on it, but you'll want to see Mark. One of the issues that we deal with when we watch a church die and then the after effect is we will inevitably say, that church was in denial. Mark, denial is the most common way that churches deal with painful realities today. All kinds of denial.
Right. All you have to do is deny it, and then you don't have to deal with it, and you don't have to make all the difficult challenges engaged in making the changes. So as long as we keep denying it, then we don't have to do anything about it. And denial is a group kind of thing, right? I mean, it's a group think. We all begin to kind of convince each other that we're really not that bad off. And you can always look at another church and say, well, they're worse off than we are. And maybe you can find that, and maybe you can dream one up. But we talked last time we were together about, like I said, about a 3-year time period that basically you're going to have, if your church is at that point, the next 3 or 4 years are going to be incredibly painful, no matter which road you take. If you say, we're denying this and we're just going to keep going, and we'll find the right pastor, it'll turn God. And a lot of times they always say, well, God can do anything. Well, yeah, but it's often going to cost you a lot.
I'd like some obedience in the process.
Yeah, the obedience is costly. You got to take up your cross every day and follow me. And you got to be willing to die to yourself and die to all your preferences and all of those things. And so oftentimes churches will deny it, and they don't realize that if they keep denying it, it's going to be really painful for the next 3 years, as they are the ones that have to watch this thing finally get to the very end. And then at the end of that, they just simply have to close it. Or they can take the road that says, yeah, the next 3 or 4 years is going to be really hard and really challenging. But at the end of that, man, there's going to be a glorious rebirth of this church. And I'm going to be able to know that when I go to heaven, this church is going to still be here and making much of Jesus and winning people to Christ. And I'll feel like I've accomplished what Jesus has asked me to accomplish. So when I sit down with a dying church, I'm saying those are really your two options. You can have a lot of difficulty and challenges and sadness with no good outcome, or you can have a lot of challenges and difficulty and hard work with an incredibly good outcome. So which
And even
one?
when
Which
you
one?
say that, they think doing nothing is an option.
They do. They think, well, we can, and it is an option for a week or a month, but it eventually catches up with them. It's a little bit like, my parents have both gone on to heaven, but there were times when we had to have the discussion with them that you can't drive anymore, you can't live on your own anymore. They got to that place; they had to move in with my siblings. Um, and so people who work with geriatrics folks, and of course, you and I are nowhere near that yet, but people who
No,
work
if you say something, Mark, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
people who work with geriatric folk say that the best time to make those decisions about what you're going to do when you can no longer really care for yourself is when you can make those decisions when you don't have to make those decisions. When
Oh,
you have
that's
the
good.
when you have the independence and the freedom to make those decisions on your own and say, look, this is who we're going to be so that we're not a burden to our children and we're going to take care of all these things rather than to wait for that day. And so in a dying church situation, the best time to deal with it is before you're actually dead, while you still have some life and you can make some choices that Jesus wants you to make and you can follow him and you can actually have some real joy in that. So absolutely. I've seen that so many times in dying churches. And I just want to encourage you that, man, don't just deny it. There's no, denial's a cul-de-sac, man. It doesn't lead you any place. So don't turn down that road of denial, but take the road that Jesus wants you to take. It'll be a hard road, a difficult road. But here's the good news. Are you ready? He walks it with you. And he says, take my yoke upon you, and my burden is light. Man, he'll walk it with you. So, man, walk with Jesus and do that way. That's what I would say, rather than walking alone. My friend Henry Blackaby used to say, if your church died, did you follow Jesus right into the grave? I mean, did he lead you to the grave, or did you quit following him and go on your own? So that's a good Henry Blackaby quote right there.
Okay, Mark, I got this question for you. It's one that emanates of profundity. It'll require you to contemplate for just a few minutes. Your wife, Jill, she's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, she's really straightforward. I mean, like head on, straightforward. And I need that. I need that.
Like at times painfully straightforward.
Yes.
Well, I can just give you an example of a straightforward wife that does not want me to be in denial about anything.
Yes.
So we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about term life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a finance guy, and I know that I should not be paying for term life insurance at age 67. Mm-hmm. I should have adequate funds stowed away where I'm not having to pay for that. And so I've eliminated all of my policies but one, the smallest of all of them. And for some reason, she wants me to keep that one policy. And I said, look at the premium. Mm-hmm. It's not worth it's not worth the benefit. And it's a 1-year policy. What's going to happen in 1 year? She said, oh, you'll likely die. So let's go in and keep it. I'm thinking,
my wife found out I had double indemnity. If I got killed in a wreck or an accident, she got twice as much. So she told me if I had a heart attack, she's going to roll me out into the street. So
I don't know how we got to.
It's not funny. We shouldn't laugh about that. But anyway,
well, it is kind of funny when our wives talk that way to us.
That's true.
We talked in the previous episode about silver bullets, and we talked about getting a new pastor being a silver bullet. But sometimes the way we did things in the past, the methodologies of the past, is a silver bullet as well. If we only had this program, or if we only had this denominational emphasis, or if only the denomination did this, if it's a denominational church, there's silver bullets well beyond pastors or new pastors.
Oh, absolutely. I was with a church that had a pastor who was well past 80. He'd been there for 40 years, and the church was down to single digits. And I asked him if you could have anything you wanted to hear, what would it be? And he said he would like a youth leader who could start a youth choir. Okay. And I love the guy, and you try to sit there and you go, that's it. That's if the resurrected Christ appeared to you right now and said, Pastor, I'll give you whatever you want, you'd say, I'd like to have a guy who can start a youth choir. That's your vision. So I asked him, I said, well, why that? He said, well, he said, he turned to his wife. He said, when was that? Maybe like, when was that? Like 30 years ago? She said, honey, that was like 50 years ago, back in the early 1970s. Yeah, yeah. We had a youth leader here and he started a choir and those kids put together a musical and they took it across the state and it was great. If we could just do that again, I'm thinking, bless your heart. That's just not the answer now. And certainly you're not going to get a youth choir here at this point. But again, just sort of looking for that, like, that's really, you look around, you think that's all we need is a youth leader who can start a youth choir. And again, just that sense of denial of who we really are and what's really happening, and the feeling like if we could just do this one thing, it could turn the whole thing around. And it's just not that easy. Jesus, it takes a lot. You remember when the very first miracle the scriptures record, Jesus told the servants
the one the Baptists don't believe in.
That's right. Well, he made the best grape juice. So Jesus told the servants to fill the jars with water, right? And if you'll notice, the Gospels say that they filled them to the brim. I mean, they didn't just do a little work; they did as much as they possibly could. And Jesus could have made the wine out of nothing, but it pleased him to use the work of the servants. And you're going to have to do the work of the church in order for your work alone isn't good enough. But it's Jesus wants you to join him in that work and work hard at it and be even strategic at it, because filling them to the brim kind of gives you some idea of strategy. We were careful about that. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but somebody listening to this will preach that Sunday morning. I promise you, they're looking for a sermon, and they wrote that down right there, and they'll preach it Sunday morning. So have at it; it's yours. You can have it.
It's profound, Mark.
It is profound.
There are other silver bullets. One I don't hear as much today is the silver bullet of a facility. If we just built a larger facility, then that would. I'm not hearing facility silver bullets nearly as much as I used to.
No, you're right. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, we just don't have a decent building. That is not, what I do hear sometimes is we don't have a decent child place. Our children's space isn't very good. I do hear that. But yeah, the idea that we just need a better building. If we build it, they will come. My goodness, you and I have been in church planting. How many times did church planters tell us, these people say they'll come when we have a building? You think, well, dude, there are buildings all over town. They're not going there. So that's probably not the case. But that's probably true. The whole building issue is something that's a little different than it used to be. That's true.
And then the humorous and sad issue you mentioned about the youth pastor starting the choir.
Yeah.
One of the silver bullets is getting, hey, if we just had a student pastor or a children's pastor.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that before, we would have children. Well, why don't you have children now?
Right.
But that is a silver bullet that is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to ask yourself, why do we not have kids? Why do we not have young families? Why do we not have teenagers? Because I can probably come to your county, put you in a car, and drive you to another church in your county that's full with teenagers and young children and young families. They're just not coming to your church. And until you really seek and understand why they're not coming to your church and the decisions you've made that you shouldn't have, the decisions you should have made that you didn't, until you deal with those and even deal with them in a repentance kind of way, nothing's really going to change. And that's where it begins. It doesn't begin with hiring a youth leader, hiring a children's leader. It begins with your heart and the heart of the church and changing those attitudes. Hiring somebody doesn't make you change your attitude. It just sort of offloads it to somebody else. And usually it's a failure when you do that.
We've talked about this many times, maybe ad nauseum, but we certainly have talked about it. And it's the issue of not seeing decline. And again, numerical decline is not the ultimate. I get that. But church leaders, church members failing to see the decline, and you and I have talked on a number of occasions about the consultation I did where they denied the decline on the own numbers that they gave us in the consultation. Mark, there's a recent example of that. I'm talking about, and this has been recorded in November 2022, I'm talking about in 2022. I made a presentation to a church in Texas with their own numbers, and they about kill me. In fact, one person walked out with me to the parking lot telling me what an idiot I was. And I mean that literally. That man was mad at me, and the woman right before that was mad at me. That is not our church. And they were all over me, and all I was doing was giving them the aggregate of what they had already reported to me. And then this is about to become therapy, so I need to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Then they said, well, our community is declining.
Right.
No, your community is increasing more than the national growth rate. They're the numbers. Well, those numbers are wrong.
Right.
Well, then go tell the Census Bureau, because that's where those numbers came from. There's all kind of denial out there.
There is.
Okay.
And we've
This
said it
year,
before.
Mark.
We've said it before. As long as you deny it, you don't have to do anything about it. And look, I struggle with my weight. I do. Especially the older I get. And I've gone to the doctor, and I'm in decent health in terms of blood pressure and everything else. But man, I need to lose more weight. So I work at it sometimes, and I can actually lose some weight, and then I sort of get off the wagon, and I'm traveling, and I'm just being honest about that. But the reason I don't really get disciplined is that I really do deny that this is really going to affect my health long term. If I get away from that denial, I'll do something about it. But it's easier to deny it and then go through the drive-through on the way to the airport. And seriously,
Which drive-through is that, Mark?
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. They're all good. Any one of them's great, so it doesn't matter. But no,
well, Chick-fil-A says they're for the Christians, but they really added on to my Christians.
There you go. So yeah, no, but you know what I mean, or whatever it is in our life. If we deny it, we don't have to deal with it, and so that's our first defense. And so denying that we're dying as a church. And again, I don't want to just get stuck on numbers like you said, but here's some metric. I was thinking about this between our podcasts. How do I know if we're declining? Yes, the numerical thing, but again, look at your baptisms. I mean, if you're not seeing anybody come to faith in Jesus Christ, we live in an incredibly lost world where people need Jesus. And if you've gone year, 2, 3 without seeing someone come to faith in Christ, that's a real indicator. If you're not seeing,
let me interject in here. There are 3 common metrics for conversions in churches today. Mm-hmm. Baptism is how they call one of them.
Right.
Professions of faith is how they call another, and conversions is how, depending upon the denominational background.
I would agree with that. Right. So yeah, that would make a difference. But that also, what happens when people visit your church? First of all, do they visit? If no one visits, then you're obviously not impacting the community. They don't even know you're there. They don't care you're there. You're not impacting people's lives. And if they do visit, how do you follow up with them? Do they come back? And then just look at your building. I mean, look around. Are your silk plants covered in dust? I mean, when was the last time you actually changed a picture on the wall? Or does it look frozen in time? I mean, those are all ways you can look at it and say, there's like nothing's going on here that's new and different and exciting, and that there's life in this place. Those are just some of the ways. And sometimes the best thing you can do is ask somebody to come and give you an outside look at it. I mean, if you're in it, it's hard sometimes to see it. But when someone comes from the outside, outside eyes can really help you determine and maybe break through that denial if you get enough outside eyes to come in and say, hey, this really is an issue, and you're going to have to deal with it.
Mark, I think that this is an indicator. It's more anecdotal than hard data. But we have at Church Answers more consultation requests today than we have had at any point in our history.
Is that right?
They are coming in. They are really coming in. I think that would be an indicator that some churches are beginning to open their eyes to the reality of where they are.
Well, and I think COVID helped with that.
They're asking for the outside eyes.
I mean, don't you think that God used COVID to shake us up?
In an ironic way, it did.
Yeah, I think say, look, we just can't keep doing what we're doing. We really didn't come back from COVID. 30-40% of our folks didn't come back, and we weren't healthy before, and we're certainly not healthy now. So yeah, one of the things I've noticed too about churches that were doing well before COVID, because I've been really diving into this a lot lately. They went down too, and they lost attendance, and some people 20-30% didn't come back, but many of those churches have grown to that point and now beyond. right?
Yes,
They've
exactly.
grown to that point and now beyond. And COVID is in their rearview mirror. They learned a lot from it. They made some quick pivots. They used it as a chance to redesign some things, and they're actually growing more. So you can't sit there and say, well, it's COVID. It may have been COVID for the first year after coming back, but other churches have done a really exceptional job post COVID. So they can't use that anymore, I think, as just an overall, well, that's just where we are with COVID.
Hey, I want to wrap this up by talking about the phrase kick the can, because denial is a way to kick the can. I don't like to put any kind of euphemism or phrase or in there without trying to understand where it came from. So I did a little research on kick the can, found out the origination of the phrase came from the Great Depression, when kids would find a can to kick because they could not afford any toys. And so the kick the can became a common game during the Depression for impoverished families, which was most families. Then in the 1980s, in a congressional hearing, someone talked about budgetary issues and said, well, we're just kicking the can. There have been many attempts to tie that budgetary comment that we're kicking the can, meaning delay something, to the game. No one has done it successfully. Some have tried. We have no idea where that congressman came up with a phrase about a game and how that's related to the game, and how kick the can came to mean, at least with that congressman, we're going to delay some. So I'm of no help there, Mark.
That's 3 minutes of my life I'm never getting back, Thom. Right there, just right there.
No, it was only 63 seconds, but
it seemed like three.
Hey, we're going to continue a lot of great topics. If you did not listen to our previous episode, go back and listen to that. Look in the show notes today, because you need to know your community, and look in your show notes today like we did last time about our Know Your Community report. Go back and put these two together. But Mark and I are about to move to some hopeful topics now. We've given you a week of autopsy and a week of denial. We're going to move to hope. So stay tuned and join us for the next episode of Revitalize and Replant. We'll see you then.